Good morning. I want to thank everyone for joining us. It is just about 11 o'clock Eastern time. We'll give it a minute or two for a few more folks to join us, and we'll get started. It's 11:01 Eastern time, and so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this Connecting Michigan Communities Digital Education in Michigan webinar. I think this is the 8th webinar in this series, and so I know many of you, I saw at least in registration, many have joined us for most, if not all of these, and so we really want to thank you and appreciate that you've taken the time to join us. Today, we're joined by Joe Polasic. He's the State E-Rate Coordinator for the Michigan Department of Education. Joe, we want to thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here, Wes. Thanks again.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I had the opportunity, I guess, back early this year to do a podcast with Joe, and certainly appreciate his perspective and opinion and understanding of how, in particular, E-Rate has an impact on the state and in particular our schools as far as connectivity goes. And there's been a lot going on, and so it should be an exciting conversation today. I want to remind everyone today that if you've got questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box. Send those in as you think about them. I'll try to get those answered, or try to bring those up and get those answered as we go through our conversation today. And if I can't get to them during the actual conversation, should have some time towards the end for Q&A, as well as the opportunity for to follow back up. It looks like we may have lost Joe momentarily, so we'll try to give him a moment to dial back in here. My apologies. Let's see if Joe's having an issue. While we're waiting for Joe to jump back in, I would love to get an idea of those of you that are currently using E-Rate. If you're on, if you want to drop a message in the chat about whether or not you utilize E-Rate, that would be great. See some answers coming in. Thank you. All right, a few coming in. Some libraries. I think some schools. Very good. I see a no in here. All right. Not sure what's happened to Joe yet, so my apologies for our technical issue here. Good responses there. I apologize. Still no idea what's happened to Joe at the moment. Try to get him back in here. All right. So while I wait for Joe, a lot of library use of E-rate. That's good. Just before we jumped on, Joe and I were discussing library use of E-rate outside of his specialty being obviously with the schools and ISDs in the state. But I was discussing the use of E-rate in the state at the library level as well. All right, so while Joe is off, you all will have to you'll have to bear with me. I'll do my best to kind of talk through E-rate a little bit, and I'll certainly lean against some of the folks that are in the they're dropping chat in for us. Again, I apologize. With Joe off, we've lost our expert, and I'm certainly not an expert in E-rate. But part of the conversation today is just being focused on digital education in Michigan, and really how E-rate helps facilitate and then further leverage what E-rate, how E-rate could be used. E-rate eligibility is certainly for our schools and our libraries, and I'm looking through some of this chat, and if you all have questions, please drop those in the Q&A, and that'll help me kind of keep a closer eye on the conversation today. And so what we'll do is, in Joe's absence here, we'll try to I'll try to monitor questions that are coming in, and we'll just kind of do a little bit of a roundtable here until Joe is able to join us. Or yeah, all right. So E-rate is a program funded through the federal government, utilizing USF dollars that allows for the funding of schools and libraries. It helps cover the cost of broadband connections or internet connections, and has in some instances in the past been able to help cover the cost of hardware. And certainly those of you who know more about this than I do, please chime in the chat. I'll continue to keep an eye on things here. But there were some questions, and we may just do some Q&A today if we have to here. But what we've got with E-rate is currently, I know from conversations with Joe, many of the ISDs in the state utilize E-rate funds. One of the things that Connected Nation Michigan typically advises is that yes, you should try to, for an ISD or schools, they should try to leverage E-rate funds. There's certainly quite a process in doing so, and actually the timeline or deadline for applications just closed, I believe, the first part of last week. But there's a lot of conversation going on around E-rate right now, as E-rate has some very, some pretty strict rules around how you can utilize that funding. There's also, has been a lot of conversation over this past month or past year about, are there ways to further utilize E-rate dollars to help, extend schools beyond, campus? How can it potentially be used to help? And I think we have Joe coming back in here. Joe, are you there?
I am, I promise.
All right. Well, you are saving me all of a sudden, because I was everybody on the call will tell you I was floundering. but I was doing my best at doing so. And I appreciate everybody sticking with us and bearing with us. Joe, now that you're back on, I was just starting to talk about E-rate and kind of very roughly explain what E-rate is. Do you mind to kind of pick that up for us and talk about it?
I would be, Wes. My gosh, what a what a great example of how important broadband is.
Joe, I think you're cutting out on us again. So we'll give Joe a minute to get back in. But the E-rate conversation is really growing and has become a hot topic. We're seeing, recently Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel discussing the need for expanding E-rate out beyond where and how we are currently utilizing E-rate funds. And so even as I mentioned, Joe and I had a conversation earlier this year in a podcast, and he and I had kind of started that conversation about how that might, what an expansion of E-rate might look like, and how we might find ways to further leverage it. We've heard of school districts really around the country who had started to look at how can we maybe further leverage, what's the gray area in E-rate funding? Are there ways that we can leverage E-rate to reach our students who can't make it to campus or are unable to make it to campus in this past year? And I think that really has ignited that conversation in our communities and certainly at a federal level. Joe, are you there now? I think we were cutting in and out again.
Yeah, I just decided to strip down all whatever technology. The 20 minutes before this, we were talking just fine and everything worked well.
Yep.
I'm just going to throw all that out the window and we're just going to go forward and strip down. So Wes, my goodness, thank you for vamping and covering as my technology has chosen the most inopportune time to take a crash. So your question was specifically, kind of what is E-rate? How does it get used here in the state of Michigan and things of that nature? So let me start there and we'll see if I get all the points of your question you were trying to ask, and we'll fill in the gaps as needed.
Absolutely.
So when I talk about E-rate to people, it's simply this. It's an FCC program that allows schools and libraries to claim discounts on broadband equipment and service. So that's basic, right? That's the basic level right there. There's two basic categories to E-rate. There's category 1 and there's category 2. Now, when I refer to these two categories, I think of them as to and through. So category 1 is to a building. That's the internet service, your broadband service that comes into your building. The transport is how it gets there. In my case, I have a DSL connection on a copper line, telephone line. It was really never meant to carry this much traffic. And on a windy day like this, apparently it's not meant to do much of anything, but we're back. So that's your category 1. That's your to the building, service to, transport to. Category 2 is through the building. That's the electronic components, the related stuff, everything from racks and, connectors, cabling, access points. This could be switches and routers, all of those things, the things that make the internet quote unquote go within your building. So category 2, that's the stuff that makes the internet service that comes to your building work through your building. And we talk about E-rate, it's a discount program and it's based on free and reduced lunch eligibility. That's reported by the schools and can reduce the cost of reoccurring services or one-time services, in fact, up to 90%. So you can see the benefit right there. If you could write off 90% of any particular bill that you have at your house, you'd take it in a heartbeat. Because as Wes and I have discussed several times, there's just not enough money for schools and libraries. I don't know about any school or library that feels that they have enough funding. And this is one of those ways that we can free up money that would be spent on this particular bill and allow that to go back to technology or other needs within that school or library. And so that's what E-rate does. Is it's going to give you discounts on a service that you need so you can use that money other places. So my role as a state coordinator some states handle this different ways. Specifically in Michigan, I'm kind of a facilitator. I'm there to ensure that applicants are applying for all the applicable E-rate discounts available to them, and that they use and keep all the funding that they can that is awarded to them. And then kind of a third to that is spreading the word, increasing the participation, kind of, extolling the virtues and spreading the gospel of E-rate around the state. Because again, I don't know any school or library that has too much money. So most schools, that's including public schools, public school academies, non-public institutions, and your libraries and library systems, most of those places are participating in E-rate currently. When we talk about library participation, when I about 3 years ago, when I got into this position, we had roughly 50% of our libraries that were participating, a little higher than that, but not great, right? That's more than half the libraries in the state of Michigan that were leaving money on the table. Now, there's good reasons for that, and we'll talk about some of those barriers later. But what we wanted to do was make sure that those institutions were aware of the benefits and that there was help available to them in accessing those funds and filling out those particular applications, et cetera. So we've been able to, in the efforts of the Michigan Department of Ed and the Library of Michigan, we've been able to increase that participation steadily. We're over 60 to 65% as of this year. So I think that our folks at the Library of Michigan and our partners at E-Rate Central who are helping out the Library of Michigan deserve a lot of credit for that. One of the other things that I do in my role, I communicate directly and regularly with applicants and consultants who are working with our applicants. So what does that look like? It's weekly updates on where we're at as far as, funding commitment decision letters, FCDLs that come out either positively or negatively for applicants, but that's usually where you get that notice that, hello, congratulations, you're funded, or sorry, you've been denied. And we always have much more on the positive side than we do in denials, but I'm keeping kind of tabs of where the numbers are. So there's like a weekly tail of the tape that goes out. I give program updates, reminders, and in recent, the past year, we've had so much going on in the broadband sphere, right? Not all of it works with directly or kind of dovetails into directly even E-rate, but it's all broadband related. And so when we're thinking about solving the broadband problem in the state, you have to make sure that you're using all the tools in the toolbox, right? E-rate is a tool to do that. I want all the people who are thinking about broadband connections in their areas or in their regions to know what other legislation is out there, what other funding is out there, what other things can you tap to improve connections to your schools, to your parent, the homes, your families in your district, those folks that need it. What are we doing for them? So there's updates around that. And then lastly, I help people problem solve a little bit, right? The sticky wickets that come through, the program integrity assurance, that's PIA review of an application. There's lots of questions. There's verifications that need to happen from a reviewer. Is the student count correct here? Is the discount correct? They come to a state coordinator for that kind of information. But I also, in my position, can jump into the fray and say, now hang on, I disagree with this particular decision, or I've got an issue with how this reviewer has handled this particular application. And then I try to get parties together and kind of facilitate, moderate, and work it all out. And in most cases, we're able to come to a positive resolution. And that's one of the biggest roles of the state coordinator, is to help applicants and be an advocate for applicants in the process, because it's so big sometimes, and it's so cumbersome to these folks. It's nice to know that they've got an ally who is versed in the program and can look at their situation and help them navigate the waters. I do not file applications for any applicants in our state, but I do make sure that those that do file have all the information that they need to be successful, and when needed, jump in and intervene on their behalf, Wes.
Joe, I appreciate that. And you alluded to it earlier. I think the number I heard you say was around 65% utilization with school districts. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Well, that's libraries.
Libraries. Sorry.
School districts are far higher than that. Schools have been on this bandwagon for a long time, and so we would be in the 90s, maybe high 90s with school representation. And that includes the PSAs, and we're working on those non-pubs, right? It's also it's a capacity issue with non-public schools, same as it is with smaller libraries, right? You don't have the people who can put on another hat.
Yep. Well, I was going to say, and you alluded to it earlier, and I think that you start talking about there that some of the barriers that districts or libraries have to utilizing the funds. Capacity being one of those. What are some other things that you've run into or you hear kind of create barriers or perceived barriers for some of these E-rate eligible entities?
Sure. Well, the biggest barrier is capacity. It's time, right? There's only a finite amount of time that a person can spend on a task. Filing for internet access year in and year out, you're basically submitting the same application over and over again, right? If that's what you're filing for your local district, that's not hard. Really, with a little bit of training and some basic understanding of the process, really you can get anybody to do that, right? But what happens when you got to train somebody else? What happens when that employee who's been doing it for 50 years suddenly decides to ride off into the sunset for well-deserved retirement? Well, heck, now I got to train somebody else, and the institutional knowledge isn't there, the program knowledge isn't there, and that's a big hole to fill. So the capacity of a local, be it a library or a school, to handle this on their own, that's definitely a barrier. When you talk about what else is keeping them away from that? Well, if I need to hire a consultant, well, now I'm paying to get a discount, and is the discount that I'm going to get, is that going to be more than what I'm going to pay out to a consultant for this work? That's something you got to weigh. Certainly, I don't know. I have never met a consultant, and I don't speak with a consultant here in the state of Michigan, and I speak to near all of them that would charge more than a district would get in discount for a contract to do the filing for them. That would be unethical, and I don't know of a single one that would do that. And frankly, I can say this because I work pretty closely with these folks. I have currently bi-weekly calls with them where we discuss what they're seeing, what they're not, and where we're at with the program. Our consultants here in the state of Michigan are great. Excuse me. And that's good because they're filing roughly 90% of all applications, E-rate applications that get filed, by schools and libraries here in the state of Michigan. They do yeoman's work. And believe me, when the end of the window came here last Thursday, we had a lot of people, I don't know if they were joking or not, but saying, you're going to find me on Friday at a beach because I'm tired, and it was a hectic window. So, when we talk about barriers, cost of finding a consultant to fill that capacity gap, that's maybe number two. But it's another one that I feel like I can mitigate with folks. And is the administrative burden really as big as you think it is? Probably not. Can you do some, can you take some time and do some research and kind of coach yourself up to get this right for a filing? On Category 1, absolutely. Category 1 filings are very straightforward, generally speaking. There certainly are pitfalls, but it's easy to navigate those as long as you know where they are and how to avoid them. If you're a new applicant and you're trying to get into the Category 2 realm, remember Category 2 is that through the building, those connections that make the internet work with your devices inside your building and on your campus. Those get more complicated. And if you wanted to reach out for help on a Category 2 application, believe me, a consultant is the way to go, because there's enough nuance and crazy and silliness in the Category 2 side of things, as far as eligibility, et cetera, that a consultant is your best bet, especially if you're new to the program filing for Category 2. So that's where a consultant can step in and take the, kind of the pressure off of you from a capacity standpoint, from a programmatic understanding standpoint. And if you're savvy enough, heck, maybe you can just take some notes and decide I can do this on my own and maybe farm out that Category 2. So there's ways to keep those costs down if you view costs as a barrier when hiring those consultants. But believe me, we got some great ones here in the state, Wes.
Are there in the most recent round of federal funding that we've seen, I think there's somewhere around $7 billion in additional funding for E-rate that we could see. How do you see those federal dollars or those federal funds being utilized in Michigan? And, do you expect, there's been conversation, I was starting, I had kind of mentioned it earlier when we were having some technical difficulties, that there's plenty of conversation around expanding how E-rate could be utilized. So I guess two-part question, how do you think that funding can, the new additional funds that Michigan may see could be utilized in the future? And, what do you think maybe some of those expansions to E-rate may look like as we, kind of rub the crystal ball and find out what the future may hold?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question, Wes. I mean, that's we're all dying to know what the FCC's mind is on how this program is going to be put together. This remote learning petition that was put out, many institutions like State of Michigan filed reply comments to the State E-rate Coordinators Association, or Alliance, excuse me. You'd think I'd know the own acronym to the group that I'm a part of. No, the State E-rate Coordinators Alliance, and to in support of the Shelby group as well, schools, hospitals, and libraries. Everybody's got ideas about what should be permissible, right? Our ideas are very different from vendors, ISPs, and service providers, right? We have. I want all the shackles off. I want E-rate for everybody. Let me use that signal all kinds of ways, all kinds of places. At least in a get me over measure while we get these providers to build out in these areas. But we have so many questions left unanswered. So specifically, the big thing that was hammered by my State E-rate Coordinators group and supported by comments from the State of Michigan's Superintendent for Public Instruction, Dr. Michael Rice, we pushed and supported the idea that at least in the short term and probably in perpetuity, we should waive the cost allocation requirement for off-campus use of E-rated signal. What does that mean in plain English? So your E-rated internet access, the broadband that you get to your schools, you're not allowed to just use that for anybody off campus for any reason, right? Vendors and service providers certainly don't want you to do that. That puts them in direct competition with you, and you're not charging anybody, generally speaking, for that. You're literally just broadcasting a signal, right? And that would work for people, as we're trying to talk about ways to overcome these access barriers. That's one tool in the toolbox. We could take E-rated signal and make it usable by folks in a given area. In Michigan, we've really got two issues that I think we've pretty well licked. Student access to school-provided devices. While I do not have numbers on this, and I will not have numbers on this officially until late in this year, we're talking late fall, maybe early spring of 2022, when the reporting finally gets done with all these federal dollars that have come out, right? If you guys could see the budgets in our state grant system right now, there's amendments happening every day for every school. We're making sure that we're maximizing the use of these funds. So we're using them for all the applicable options. And if there's, if Pot A has, some strings that are very specific and Pot B is a little looser, we're going to make sure that we're spending Pot A first and again, maximizing that funding. Near every school in the state of Michigan had to find a way to get devices in student hands. They have done that. I say that with no backing data, but I believe it to be true in the conversations I've had with ISDs and their tech directors. I also think that we've solved the issue of student access where a hotspot provided by the school would solve that issue. That means that there has to be LTE service of a decent level in that area. And it has to, if cost was a problem, if affordability was the issue for that particular family, the school solved it. So those are two good things that came out of all the CARES Act dollars. We've had 2 rounds of that. We've had only 40% of the second round released. There's 60% still stuck in that staring contest between the governor's office and the legislature right now. So there's more to come. those issues have been fairly well resolved. So if I set those aside, what do I want this new money to do? I've had colleagues that are pushing for retroactive funding of devices and hotspots. And I'm very quick to say, it's state of Michigan, I don't need that. And if we use that, funding to retroactively fund or cover the cost of devices that were already covered on 2 previous relief bills, then I feel like we're doing a disservice to the fund, and we're not going to do what we hope we would do, which is really help close the homework gap. Do I think that that money should be able to be used to pay for the cost of the service, the broadband service plans for those hotspots that are serving those students and by proxy those families? Absolutely. That's an ongoing cost, and the school should not be asked to fund that out of pocket. That would be immensely expensive over time, especially when you scale that up to the number of devices that those schools have given out. So, that's 7.2 billion with a B, right? That's a lot of money, but as soon as you start hacking and cutting little bits off it, it's death by 1,000 cuts. So could that money be used to pay for that service for hotspot devices? Absolutely. I think it should. Certainly that should be permissible. Should it pay for satellite service to homes in the state of Michigan where there is no LTE service? Should it cover the cost of not just the service, but also the equipment? Should it do it to 100%? I certainly think so. And that's something that I'm advocating for. We're waiting to see what kind of comes out of all of these groups because the initial comment period hasn't come up yet. And I know we got some big players jumping in early, but with such a short window, it was only 10 days to craft comments to a document that we were called that report and order in our SECA group, the document of 5,000 questions, because that's literally what the document was. It was leading questions and probing questions all presented by the FCC, put out there to kind of drive decision making, make you think about certain things certain ways. It was good. It's a good document, but good grief, is that a short period to turn this around. If we're really looking to close the homework gap, my wish list is make sure that we can fund family connections in areas that are unconnected. If we can't connect you through an LTE hotspot, then I got to find a way to get you on. So satellite's it at this point, right? If I don't have a wired connection, if I can't get decent LTE service, it's satellite service. So how can I support with E-rate that particular goal without spending all this money on, satellite service in these areas? Well, we could use E-rate. We could use the E-rated service. We could use the E-rated transport that we pay for, that the state education network has access to, that our schools, our ISDs, our districts, their wide area networks, their regional networks, their own fiber where they have their own connections that they own and manage and maintain. Well, what's stopping us? Well, that FCC rule about, how we use our E-rated service is stopping us. But if that is finally waived, a school could put a tower on top of their building, broadcast a signal out to their neighborhood. Northern Michigan University is doing something very similar up in Marquette, have been doing it for a while. There's a model that shows that there's some value there. What about setting up a daisy chained line of sight, set of towers, from a school building and terminating it kind of like a broadband oasis in an internet connectivity desert, right? Could we get something to a space that's near people that allows them to not drive, an hour to the nearest Starbucks or McDonald's, where they can get online and not have a cost to them necessarily? After the flooding in Gladwin and Midwin counties due to the catastrophic dam failures, Clara Gladwin ISD was approached by a group that said, hey, we want to use your infrastructure and we want to bounce some signal off a bunch of silos on out, to the east so that we can get emergency signal and broadband service to this area that has just been destroyed, right? All the infrastructure was underwater, was blown up, was uncovered and rolled down the river. So in that particular case, Claire Gladwin was able to procure a separate internet access source, and this company literally set up the equipment, tower equipment to bing, 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 bounce them off of silos all the way out to Midland County. and serve those areas. Is it an end solution? Absolutely not, but it's a Band-Aid. And we have to think about these mid-level solutions to get us where we at least have some available service to people who don't have it or don't have fidelity of service, until we can, finally crank that up and make this what it needs to be, right? We need this to be a Tennessee Valley Authority type infrastructure build from the federal government that regulates broadband as a utility and makes sure that all homes in not just Michigan, but around the nation are connected, because that's the only way that you're really going to have equity of access.
Joe, that's a great statement. We've had a few comments kind of come in as you were talking here. A couple making note of just, the cost. You mentioned the idea of the consultants and the cost associated with that, and some supporting that idea that in some instances it's just too it's too costly to bring a consultant in, and I would certainly encourage those who think that the cost is too great. I think, Joe, you would welcome it too, to have that conversation to ensure that at least all options are being reviewed as to how you might leverage the funds that are going to be there, that are currently there and will be there in the future. Not to I'd hate for someone to believe that it's just too costly, or that there's not a way to leverage the funds, and it be something that's there's some options for, whether that be through consultants or just through more training. Comments about utilizing and supporting the idea of expanding to off campus, if you will, from schools and libraries with E-rate, and certainly that's happening all over the country. This conversation is, there are districts that are building and looking at like private LTE networks that are being developed. And so those are not an uncommon conversation. And I think there's actually quite a bit of conversation happening around the country within districts as they anticipate the potential changes with E-rate, that's an option. And I think some are, considering it a luxury that they don't have, but just an absolute need to be able to prepare and expand, to the community or to their students, and where their students are. Over the past year, I don't think a year ago, none of us thought we would be teaching everything remotely. And certainly one of the top things that I had heard coming out of 2020 into 2021 is that we would go from an in-person primary delivery for content in an educational system to a digital primary kind of content. And so, my wife being a first grade teacher, she will tell you that she's now thinking about how she delivers her content digitally, and then, has the luxury of doing so in person. And so I think it's just changing the way our educators are thinking. It's changing the way that we think about how it's being delivered. And if it's going to be delivered in that format, being able to close the gap has never been more important. And I think the gap, there was always an understanding that there was a homework gap, but I don't think any of us understood, or many of us did not understand how broad and how deep that gap really is until this past year. And so, Joe, thanks for the work that you do, within the state, trying to close that gap. But also are those that are on the call today. There are tons and tons of folks who have jumped on and said, yeah, they're utilizing E-rate, they're doing different things. Certainly, this idea of, and I appreciate the comment that closing the homework gap is one issue. The other is adults without children at home who need service. And I certainly couldn't agree with that more. I think our community, and I really hope our FCC is recognizing that it's not just about our students, but it's truly about an entire family unit, and that helps a lot too. Certainly, those without children, is something that I've thought a lot about, as a lot of our programs kind of rotate and look specifically at those with children. And so it's not, it's something we can't forget is that we have lots of folks in our communities who don't have children. And it may be that they're elderly or they just don't have children or whatever it may be. And so continuing to address and look at and resolve issues that we run into are going to continue to be important. Joe, as we kind of get into a Q&A time here, is there anything else that you would want to touch on that maybe we haven't already talked about, or something that you run into pretty often that you'd want to maybe talk about?
Well, I want to address there was in the chat, one of our commenters mentioned that it's tough to afford a consultant sometimes, especially when you're a high need district, a high discount district, that correlates to a poverty indicator. And so high NSLP count, that's a poverty indicator. That means that you're dealing with a lot of things in your district, right? If you think you can't afford help, I can help. I just can't file. And we can talk about barriers that exist, and we can work on, if it's a capacity issue with a given, if we want to say, okay, this person's going to be our E-rate person, we just need some help and some resources. Man, I'm all about that. So anybody who hasn't gotten into the E-rate game and wants to, just get a hold of me. And Wes will have all of our contact information up here soon. So just note the email address, and you can get a hold of me at any time. I'm really good at getting back to folk on my email, especially because we're definitely afraid of being away from our seat now that we're working from home, because goodness me, what if somebody thinks we aren't actually working? Oh man, it's crazy sometimes. So I just wanted to address that directly. Give me a call, we'll talk about it. But as far as what you can do, because it feels like a really big problem, right? This is a big issue. And let me reiterate, this is not an education issue to solve. This is not something that we should be asked in the Department of Education to work on. What we do is we point out the people that are suffering because of lack of access. I like to joke with folks that, if you remember the Christian charities, the commercials back in the day, for $1 a day, you too can support broadband internet for someone in need. And that's kind of where we're at. So where does your advocacy start? It starts right in your local town, right in your little community, like my little community. I live in Portland, Michigan here. I'm going to city council meetings and talking about the need for a municipal network. Is it easy for me because I have a background in this stuff? Yes, absolutely. But your elected officials will listen to you when you speak. Your local officials, your township officials, don't think that those folks aren't interested in continued economic development or increased property values in a given area. Talk to your county folks, and of course, your state representatives, state senators, your federal Congress people. Those are folks that you need to get a hold of and talk about, this is what we need and now is when we need it, because never have we had more interest and more of a bright light shown on this particular problem. We've known this problem existed for a long, long time, especially in education. So now that everybody knows it's a problem and everybody's saying, oh, geez, yeah, my neighbor can't get their kid online to do schooling. Well, that also means that they can't get online necessarily and access goods and services and or start a business and sell things out of their home. There's lots of things to this digital equity puzzle that could be solved, a lot of economic gains that could be made by making these connections. So advocate, advocate, advocate. Now is the time to get out there and write and call and be in someone's ear about what we want to see and why we want to see it, because everyone is seeing how important it is currently.
Joe, those comments are so important to most of our communities and all of our communities, is just being an active participant, right? Not to sit back and expect someone else to do it. And the more of us that are engaged, number one, the more our voices are heard. But the bigger this topic becomes, and unfortunately, oftentimes Connected Nation Michigan, we're working in a lot of rural locations, and so there's a lot of other problems still being dealt with in the rural community, and to ensure that broadband is a top of the line kind of topic for our local leadership is important. And you kind of alluded to it, but it's no longer a luxury. It's important for our communities. and not just because we want to be able to check our email and watch our Netflix, although in the past year, being able to watch Netflix may have saved your sanity. It's about being able to be an active part of an economy that is changing rapidly, where internet was, kind of consumer driven. I want to watch this content or pull down this content. There's now so much more digital content being developed and pushed upstream, if you will. And so it's really changing the way that we look at and what the digital economy, and I've seen digital economy pop up a time or two in our chat box this morning. It's really, we're shifting to a digital economy, and this is the vehicle. These are the super highways, if you will. I hate those terms, but this is how we have access to that. And to ensure that our communities, whether they're large or small, have access is vitally important to not only the success of a community, but ultimately, its ability to survive in the future. And so great comments, good comments coming through in the chat as well. Certainly appreciate that. Joe, before we sign off, any additional comments? We're running up on our time. Actually, I've gotten just a little bit past it here, but certainly with some of the technical difficulties we had, we can take an extra minute or two to let you, I guess, sign off with any additional conversation.
Well, first and foremost, I want to say thank you to Wes for dealing with the tomfoolery that we had to deal with today with my internet and then eventually my odd technology glitches. I want to thank all of you for sticking it out too. It's no fun when you're trying to listen to something and it starts to go sideways. So we appreciate you sticking with us and being okay with us kind of needing to sort it out, specifically me trying to sort it out. You got questions, I've got answers. And if I don't have answers, I'm going to find the answers, right? I know people, okay? I got access to great minds throughout the country when it comes to E-rate. Connected Nation and Connect Michigan and the MEDC and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation are all doing yeoman's work here in our state to try and bring everyone together so that when we have broadband conversations, we're not doing it in a vacuum. So that if I'm talking about connecting kids for an educational purpose, I'm not also forgetting to talk about the economic benefits in a given area. And if having those conversations together or getting those people together to talk about the same thing, which is connecting people for different reasons, right? Now we're starting to build that big tent, that coalition that really moves things. So if you've got questions for me regarding educational broadband or other things, I can direct you to people. Certainly you can get a hold of Wes and the good folks at Connected Nation who are working very closely with our friends at the MEDC, as I mentioned. This is what's going to take. It's going to take a village, people. We're going to have to get it all together, and we're all going to have to start pulling on the rope the same way. We all want this. We can make it happen. We can do it together. We just need all of you to be just as loud as I've been and as annoying as I can be with your administration, with your legislators, with your local representation. Let it be known that this is something we want solved.
Thanks, Joe. And I'll echo the fact, if you need to reach out, please, feel free to reach out to me. If you haven't had the chance to grab Joe's contact information, I'll be happy to get you in touch with him. Certainly, CN will be happy to help assist with questions and things that you may have that we can help with. But we do appreciate you taking the time today and being gracious with us early on there as we were trying to get Joe back on and being gracious to me. You didn't throw any tomatoes because again, Joe's clearly the expert in this conversation today, and I am not, and so I appreciate you sticking with me. This will be available within the next couple of days here, probably for review, and I'll send it out to those who registered who were unable to join us today. But we do thank you, and we'll be back again in a couple of weeks where we'll be talking about kind of developing local leadership. We anticipate Dan Manning being able to help us lead that. He's one of our CTAs in the southern portion of the state. And so we look forward to being back here with you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.